Hi, this is another video. This one is showing you how to deal with the CVD and metabolic syndrome risk write-up. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go right here to metabolic CVD and syndrome risk. So as you can see by this right here, there's a couple of links in here, and what you're literally going to be doing is going to these links and then filling in the requisite information. So you can see that step 3 here says describe your initial risk. Describe your initial risk by listing the risk factors and the risk associated with your data from the CardioSmart assessment. So first thing we do is go to the CardioSmart assessment, and we click on that. Now, some teachers, when they say make a list, they actually want you to put in a paragraph. I don't want the data put into a paragraph. I want it in an actual list. And the form that you see right here on the screen, that's basically a list, and that's exactly the format you're going to use in your write-up. So first thing, total cholesterol, you can only input numbers between 130 and 320. Even if you are lower than 130 or higher than 320, those are the numbers they use because those are the ones that they have good data on in terms of calculating your disease risk. So you go through here and you put in the totals for the numbers here. Now you'll notice some of them have a little red star next to them, and those are the ones that they use for doing their calculations, and they're the ones that are going to have the biggest effect on whether your numbers are injurious or whether they're actually healthy numbers. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just filling in the data so you can see what the end product looks like. So you'll notice that age is in fact a risk factor. So once I have finished filling in all of this information, I'm then going to hit calculate. Okay, now these are all my healthy numbers, i.e. it's my starting point. For some of you, you may actually start out with unhealthy numbers, and in that case, instead of making yourself into a train wreck for the next step, you may want to be looking at what you can do to improve your disease risk. Okay, so once we hit the calculate button, you can see that we have all of these boxes that are associated with the scores, and those boxes then have a color code that you can see down here. Now this color code really doesn't apply to this risk score up here. Even though this risk score is in blue and says less than 1%, it's not really applicable to these color codes. It would have been better if they had just put this in black so that people didn't get those confused. These color codes, they actually apply to these boxes up here that you can see. So what I would do in your write-up is you put in total cholesterol, colon, the number that you entered there, and then you just take this first sentence. So your total cholesterol is in the desirable range, less than 200 milligrams per deciliter. Okay, I would just copy that and paste that right into my write-up so that I basically end up with a list that looks fairly similar to this under my step 3. Now, when we go to step 4, what we're going to look at what it says for step 4. Step 4 says, describe the changes in risk using the calculate button that are associated with worse numbers for high blood pressure, high total cholesterol, high HDL cholesterol, smoking, diabetes, and age. And yes, age is a risk factor in and of itself. So explore at least 3 factors with smoking as a contributing factor. That means 4 factors. Okay, 4 factors. It's going to come out in step 4 to a minimum of 3, count them, 3 paragraphs. You can do more than 3 paragraphs, but don't do less than 3. Now, let's go back to our risk assessment here. So let's look at what happens when we start changing things. So first thing I'm going to do, because I need to do 3 factors plus smoking, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click yes on smoking, hit calculate, and you can see my risk went from less than 1% up to 1%. But we need more than just smoking. We need to look at what would happen if we are making ourselves into a train wreck. So I'm going to go all the way to the biggest number they will let me put in, which is 320. Okay, and I'm going to hit calculate again. And there you can see it jumped me up to 6%. Now, with this, you will notice that we couldn't really tell how much my risk improved with smoker, because going from less than 1% to 1% does not delineate what that change in risk was, because we don't know how much less than 1% my risk actually was. So what we can do is we can now backtrack. Now that we've got this risk at 6%, I can go back up to smoking, and I can click on smoking, and I can go no to smoking, hit calculate again. And when we come down here to our risk score, you can see it's at 2%. So now we know that the smoking increased my risk by somewhere around 300%, or 3 times the amount of risk. Okay, so talking about those things, that would be my first paragraph within step 2. Okay, so my second paragraph in step 2 would have to do with going to a third risk factor that would then again change what the scores were. So now if we go back to our writing prompt, we can see that the next step is going to be switching over to a new website. So we go ahead and click on that link, and that takes us to our next website, which is Medscape. Now, what you see here in this area right here is actually the information that we really want to look at. So what we're going to be looking at is just this right here. So you'll notice if I click on this, fasting glucose greater than 100, because I'm type 2 diabetic, I have to click that. Okay, and you can see that a 1 pops up right here. So let's go back to our writing prompt here, and you can see step 6 says, describe what your metabolic syndrome risk is based on your results from the Medscape calculator. So my results from the Medscape calculator would be 1 risk criteria, and that would put me in this range right here, absent. Now, if I go back in my own personal history, my HDL used to be below 30, or actually, sorry, below 40, and my abdominal measurements were above 40 inches. So that would have put me at 3 total criteria, and that gets me into this 3 to 5 range, which is present. So what I need to include in my write-up is all of the information here, because not only do I have to talk about where I am currently at 1 point, which is absent in the 0 to 2 range, and present being 3 to 5 range. I need to delineate those things. I also need to delineate all of these factors right here. All of these criteria that are listed here need to appear in my write-up. And that is because when you look at the question here for step 6, describe what your metabolic risk is based on your results from the Medscape calculator. So that would be 1 risk criteria. But I then need to further delineate what are the risk criteria for metabolic syndrome. Okay, so if we go back to our Medscape calculator here, because we have describe as what we need to do, describe quite literally means don't leave anything out. So that means I need to have all of this, what my count is, and I need to have this as well. What are the thresholds to fall into these two different categories. Okay, now we get to the tough part of this, which is step 7. Okay, step 7 is describe how learning your family history affected your sense of cardiovascular disease and metabolic risk. So on this, what I am literally asking is talk to your family, find out what your family history is. But then what I want is not your family history. What I want is how your family history affected your sense of cardiovascular disease and metabolic risk. You can tell me what diseases run in your family, but don't tell me who had them, because those would be a violation of HIPAA laws. And those have a $100,000 possible fine for each violation. So you really don't want to be letting slip that information. If you have several aunts, you don't even want to say, my aunt had this, okay? Because that's getting too close to actually letting out someone's medical information. So you can say, in my family, these diseases were there. This is how it affected my sense of risk, knowing that those are possible familial relation diseases. All right. So once you get this all written up, okay, you need a list for step 3. You need at least 3 paragraphs in step 4. You need to not leave anything out of your description of metabolic syndrome risk from the Medscape calculator. Don't leave anything out. Make sure you have all the information you see on the screen there included. And describe how learning your family history affected your sense of cardiovascular disease and metabolic syndrome risk. And lastly, if you are adopted or you've lost track of certain segments of your family, that's fine. You just need to say that in the paper, and you will still get full points for that. This is not an excuse to lie and say that you're adopted because you don't want to talk to your family. So just, go ahead, talk to your family, find out what you can about your family history, and then how does that change your sense of risk? All right. I look forward to seeing your assignments.